Part of Worlds, where I talk with a fabulous writer about some aspect of craft or publishing. And this week, my guest is Charlie Jane Anders, and I wrote up a little thing, which I'm going to skip. So if you don't know who Charlie Jane Anders is, you should. But anyway, she is a Hugo, Nebula, Locus, Crawford, Lambda, and Emperor Norton award-winning writer and podcaster and editor. And I had a longer thing, but I'm just going to, is it okay if I let that go? So we can.
Sure. Yeah,
right
sorry again. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. Stop. No apologizing. So Charlie Jane, I'm so glad to have you here. And we have to end at the hour, at the top of the hour.
Oh no.
Yeah, because there's another thing happening, but it's okay. We could, if we keep going on, I'll just have you back next year.
I'll come back.
So I'm really glad when I asked you if there was anything you wanted to talk about, and you said establishing an inner monologue and how it's different between first and third person. And I was super excited that you suggested this, because it turns out that I'm a super analyzing person for most of the things I do as a writer, but it turns out that I haven't thought much about this, because for me, voice, or the way in terms of monologue and that, for me, that's more of a vibe thing. Like that's more a playing by ear thing. So I am super excited to see what you have to say, because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions.
Okay.
But I wanted to quickly start with just giving a quick definition of first versus third. So go ahead.
Oh, you want me to define them?
Just quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. First person is literally just like the narrator is I'm telling my story. It could be first person present, like this is happening to me right now, or past, or this is a thing that happened to me in the past, but it's somebody telling their story. It's the narrator is I. And then third person is, just it's everybody's he, she, they, it, whatever. And it's, it's a narrator. There is a narrator who may or may not feel like a presence in the story, who is telling what happened to these people and what they did and everything.
Excellent. Yeah, I usually do the one like this, like I was walking down the street and I turned the corner and there was a man with a gun pointed at me. And second person, which is weird, you were walking down the street.
Yeah, I mean, people do it like, yeah, I mean.
And yeah, then the difference between third limited and third omniscient. And third limited, it's like he or she was, they were walking down the street and they turned the corner and a man was pointing a gun at them, as opposed to omniscient is they were walking down the street and they were about to turn the corner, and what they didn't know was that a man was standing on the other side pointing a gun at them. So so one of the things that we do as writers is we choose which perspective we're going to use, right?
Yeah.
And that in itself is a big choice. And actually, I was just told by CJ that we can run long. We can run long if we need to. So.
Okay, sure. We could go like a little after 2. Yeah.
Yeah. We can do it. 2 on your part of the world.
Right.
So, but let's come back to that later in terms of talking about why we choose which perspective we want. And I really wanted to hear you. And I'm going to say to you what I always say to people, which is feel free to use your own work as examples the way you would as a teaching example, because that's what you know best. And you know how in panels we're kind of like, oh, it's kind of a little rude to talk about your own work constantly in a public panel,
Really? I don't know. I mean, I feel like I always like it when people do that on panels, but yeah.
Well, it depends on how it's done. Sometimes there's people like, well, in my book, I had a great battle. I don't know. There's a way that can be done, but this is the place, because this is meant in part as a thing for people to hear about a kind of a deep dive into craft. This is the place to say, I thought about doing this and then this happened. And then, so this oh God, I can't even talk. Do a deep dive using your own work as an example, because people are here, I hope, to try to grapple with their own process. So what is an internal monologue?
Yeah, I mean, an internal monologue is basically the characters kind of thinking about, obsessing often about what's going on with them, thinking about what's important to them. It's, what their desires are, what their resentments are, their unfinished business. It's often how you kind of key into the thing that's driving your protagonist through the story. A lot of YA books are really good with at having a strong internal monologue because a lot of YA books are really powered by like the main character has like this goal that they really need and they're really chasing it intensely, or something that they're really upset about that they're freaking out about all the time. And I feel like a strong internal monologue is what kind of anchors you into character and makes you want them to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve, makes you kind of root for them. I always point to George R. R. Martin as somebody who's really good at internal monologues. Like he'll write like 8 or 9 POVs in a book, and each one of those characters will have a really strong internal monologue where there's something that they just keep chewing over and chewing over, and it's something that colors all their interactions, and like they can't let go of it, and it's just like it's eating them up, and they just keep going. And I feel like that's the thing that I really admire about George R. R. Martin's work in particular that I've tried to emulate.
That's a really good point because it is possible to write characters who all seem to think alike and
Uh,
act alike. And then all that's differentiating them is a name and the plot structure, right? And so the internal monologue is part of what allows us as readers to differentiate them. And that's a good
for
point
sure.
about
Yeah,
George Martin.
absolutely. Yeah.
Like if I think about, I've only read the first 3 books of Game of Thrones, but and I didn't watch the TV series, but I can still in my mind keep most of those characters apart. Like I can put a name to, well, not a name to them, but I can put a thing to them, right? You
Hmm.
know, the tough
Yeah.
sister, the princess sister, right? So they all have these, you know. So is there more you want to say about why we use internal monologues, or and maybe even I'm just thinking about books that I read sometimes, and this is like the old school, I don't know, Dashiell Hammett, where there isn't much internal monologue, right? It's people's
I no, I
action.
disagree. I disagree.
You think there's a
Pick,
lot in, I
oh
wonder,
my God, pick up a Raymond Chandler novel, and I'm pretty sure actually Dashiell Hammett too. They are just constantly going and going and going. It was a rainy night, the kind of night that makes you think about your mother. I hated my mother. My mother made me eat stewed beets. I was out here trying to save the city. This city was full of scum. I had to save it. There was a man out there, and I was going to find him. And when I found that man, I was going to do something. And blah blah blah. That man, he had done something, and I was going to get him. And like this kind of city is running, the gutters are running with blood, and I'm going to do something about it. And like, you know, just oh my God, those kind of noir, hard-boiled pulp detective novels are just non-stop internal monologue. Mickey Spillane, I went on a huge Mickey Spillane kick in college. I read like 10 Mickey Spillane novels, and he just will have 3 pages in a row, no paragraph breaks, of just like Mike Hammer just being like, and they wanted me to be dangerous, I would be dangerous. They wanted me to be tough, I would be tough. I would kill all day. I would kill everybody. I would kill anyone who got in my way. If you get in my way, I'm going to kill you. And blah, blah, blah. Just like pages and pages of this stuff, just ranting in his head. And like that's what makes those books work is the strong internal monologue of
yeah,
these
yeah.
detectives. Sorry, I don't mean to contradict you, but
No,
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 I
no,
love
no,
those
no.
books. I
This
almost
is
want to
what
go
this
and
is
grab my
for.
Mickey Spillane books off the shelf, but like all those guys do it. Like it's
I
like
haven't read a Chandler book for so long
I'm
that
sure Hammett
now
does too.
I'm sure he does too, or either of them. I'm sure they both do. And so no, this is exactly why we're having this, because I've never read a Mickey Spillane novel. Never.
I
Right?
mean, I love it. He's an acquired taste, Mickey Spillane. People look at me funny when I say I like him, but
But no, but the point that you're making here is what draws people in, is that okay, so this is what's so helpful to me about this, because I tend to fall into that trap, and I'm going to call it a trap, of thinking that an internal monologue is, you know, my feelings expressed as feelings. I was so angry right now, right? But all of the things that you're talking about are an internal monologue, but they're expressed without explicitly saying that I felt this way. This, you see the difference with that? And actually, that's an actually incredibly sophisticated form. That's the most sophisticated form of internal monologue, where you're completely in that person's psyche in a way
Hmm.
that that's truly, yeah. So no, this is exactly perfect. It's perfect. So do you think you were influenced by these writers?
By the hard-boiled Pulp Fiction
Yeah,
writers?
yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no. I mean, the way they do plotting influenced me a lot, but also the way they do character. And like, you look at someone like Ross McDonald, the way he like weaves like theme and stuff into his work. Chandler too. Like those guys are really good at like bringing theme out through like just making connections between stuff. I feel like, yeah, I'm hugely influenced by those books. I think everybody should read detective fiction, like especially like newer. There's some great newer detective fiction, but the classics, yeah, for sure, you got to read them.
Yeah, they're plotted differently, and of course the way they use language is different than how we use it now. Um, it's like watching a film from the 50s. They even talk a little differently.
They do.
What is that? The Paths of Glory. Have you ever seen Paths of Glory? The old Kirk
No.
Douglas. I think it's a World War I film. They like literally their diction is different, and it's kind of weird to watch it, and you're going like, why are they talking funny? But it was just how their diction was at that time for a film. Um, and so in a way, internal monologues, I guess, are going to change in in how they're done in our film in our film, how they're done in our fiction as styles change across time. So how do you use I mean, I use internal monologue all the time. I just don't think about it this much. So how do you use it?
I mean, I use it kind of the way I talked about before to like anchor the characters in, you know, in kind of terms of like their motivations and in terms of their preoccupations. Like, I feel like this is something I think about a lot in terms of like, this is part of, as a reader as well as a writer, this is how I bond with a character. If a character has like something that they are obsessing about, something that like is consuming them, and I wrote about this in my newsletter a while ago. I don't need characters to be like proactive. Like I feel like there's this thing that people fall into sometimes where they're like, well, that character didn't have agency. And it's like this very culturally weighted concept, but it's also just like
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
that all characters have to be the same. All characters have to like take action and be proactive and like solve their problems, or like, we want only one, every character has to be like the guy from The Martian or whatever, and just be like rolling up their sleeves and just being like, I'm going
That's a
to
great
fix this.
example. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I think that I do want characters who care about what's happening or who have like some kind of stake. And obviously you could do an apathetic character and you could make it work and I could love it. But as a general rule, I like characters who have strong feelings about things and who think about stuff a lot and things push their buttons or they have stuff that they can't let go of. I feel like that's part of what often makes me more interested in a character. And that is almost, you can do some of that through their actions. You can show their actions of like how, their actions show what they care about. But I also think that looking at the other way around, for their actions to be believable, you have to have the internal monologue to back it up. And like, if, I often will, when I have a first draft and I know that this character is going to shoot their best friend in the head on page 200, I need to make that plausible, which means that the stuff leading up to page 200 needs to like be this churn of internal monologue where they're grappling with something and they're trying to make sense of their situation and they're like having all these feelings about their best friend,
Mhm.
and like finally it comes to a point where they just have to shoot their best friend in the head. And like, if as a general rule for me, the more drastic the action the character takes, the more I'm going to need the internal
Yeah.
monologue to be like kind of queuing that up, teeing that up so that we see it like that it's going to happen. And like, I feel again, George R. R. Martin, not to pick on him too much, but he does that really well. And like, but a bunch of authors, I feel like, anybody who like a lot of epic fantasy authors do that really well. And like, I feel like that's part of how you stay with something for like such a long span, is just that the characters have this thing that's compelling that you want to see what they do about it or how they deal with it.
Yeah, and especially when we're talking big emotional choices as opposed to plot choices. You can have a political choice. I mean, political choices or action choices can also be emotional choices, and the best ones are. But it's exactly right that an emotional choice has to be set up to have impact. And the way that it gets impact is to see why that the reader, if the reader understands a second before the character does, why they're going to end up doing this inevitable thing that may be terrible or may be great, that's that moment of, it's almost like a magical moment in the text of that interaction between the reader and the writer, I think. And an internal monologue that has set that up is yeah, it's like chef's kiss, right? It's just perfection. When maybe not, I don't believe in perfection, but anyway, it's like the perfect flavor to it, because that's what you want. You want them to go, oh my God, they're gonna shoot up, they're gonna shoot their best friend in the head, bam. And then they feel it all. And without that, if it's all just so how do you, so can you give specifics about how you personally, well, we're not even to the first and we're not even to the first and third yet, but I want to hear like what stages do you go along the way to reach, to set up big emotional choices? Because you can't dump everything in the first chapter, right? You can't do that, you know, you can't dump it all in the first chapter. You have to get to know people like you do in real life.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, what you said before, I want to slightly push back when you say that, like,
Do
oh,
it.
you know, the purpose is like, oh, they're going to shoot their best friend in the head. Oh, they're going to do it. Oh, they're going to do it. You know, I think that there's a way that you could do this where they're shooting their best friend in the head is still a huge surprise. It's like, wow, I did not see that coming. But then you realize that it's been building
Yeah,
for a while.
yeah, yeah.
Like, you're like, oh, you know, all this stuff that they've been like chewing over, that is what caused this. Like, I could see how this was inevitable, but I didn't see it coming. And like I feel like that's
And I
part of
agree. I
that,
think both ways, either the seeing it coming or they're going like, oh my gosh, of course that's what was going to happen. Either
right?
of those are those great engaged reader reactions.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, you gotta like you obviously you can't control what your reader is going to think when they read your book, but you know, either way is valid. But I think that you've got to like, I don't know, it's got to feel like you're there's got to be suspense, but also a feeling of like you kind of understand what this person is doing, why they're doing it. And always a little bit of a balancing act. And you know, the suspense could be like, are they going to pull it off, or are they going to get away with it too? It's just, you know, it's tricky. But yeah, I mean, I think that I'm trying to think of a specific example from my work where there's been something shocking that I had to build up. Man, I feel like there's so many examples, and now I'm just drawing a blank. But
I can give one from my own work, but
okay, yeah.
unfortunately, I have used it before. So if anyone's heard it already, I apologize, because it was one of the most, because it came as a surprise to me. It was a case in which I had built up over, it happens in the fourth book of the Geron sequence. And in books 2 and 3, a character is introduced whose internal monologue is such that he has a complete sense of he's a very responsible member of, this is really simplifying it, of the ruling class of his society. But his assumption of where he stands on that is just, it's total. He's never had any, you know, he's his grandmother's favorite. He does everything right. He's the best. He's a great warrior. He does, you know, he's thoughtful. You know, it's just everything right. So then in the fourth book, he gets completely taken out of that society and puts in a different society where he has trouble adjusting because he's a different person now. He doesn't have that status anymore, even though in his head, he still has it. So in the course of the fourth book, he ends up in front of the colonizing ruler, and purely because of the way he addresses people, which is this expectation, they treat him, because their way of dealing with status and hierarchy is more similar to his original space than to the middle space that he was in before. Does that make sense? And
Hmm.
so they treat him and basically elevate him to a position of immense power simply because of how he addresses them, which is his expectation. And I didn't see it coming. but I had set it up.
Wow,
So I
interesting. I
reached
love
this
that.
point. Yeah, I reached this point where he has to address, he's brought before the emperor. And I thought, well, now how is he going to act? And I thought, well, he's going to act like a Sakhalin would. He's, 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 they're the top family of the ruling families. And why wouldn't he act this way, of this expectation that they'll recognize him as a prince, right? And so they're like, oh, okay, he's a prince. And I was like, I literally stopped when I was writing and I said like, oh shit, I wasn't expecting it. And
Oh my God, I love that. That's
it
awesome. I
was
love
one of
that.
the best moments of my writing life. And it's funny because I don't always think of that. This is what's so interesting to me about where we started with the noir, because I didn't necessarily identify that as internal monologue, but of course it is. That whole thing I was doing with him is his internal monologue, his relationship with the world. So this is great. This is blowing my mind. Um, I'm redefining things for myself.
Well,
Um,
good. I'm really
yeah,
glad.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you asked before about like how do you kind of start setting things up, and I think like for me, when you're starting a book or even a short story, like the opening is kind of just establishing the character, but also oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes those opening pages, like the first few pages, are like the thing that kind of starts them on their path. And like,
Mhm, mhm.
sometimes it's like you start the story or the book or whatever on the day that everything kind of goes bad for them or falls apart for them, or the day that they find this amazing opportunity that they start chasing, something that kind of is like starts them on this track that they're going to keep accelerating down. And like, so, the internal monologue is often just them kind of like grappling with whatever it is that's changed in their life at the start of the story. And then over time, as they grapple with that, then they grapple with other stuff. And then, there's more, and it just kind of picks up, it kind of accrues more stuff. Like just the things get bigger and bigger as it rolls downhill, kind of. And so they're thinking about the stuff that they were thinking about at the start of the story or the book, but also everything that's happened since then, and like all the things that people have said to them. One thing that I've really borrowed from YA, I think that's very much a YA technique, is having like if somebody says something to a character and they keep thinking about it, it just comes back as like little italicized like snippets of what this person said to them. And that's part of the internal monologue. That's like them
Right,
kind of
right.
remembering what this
Yeah.
person said, and they're like, this person said, you know, um, you should never wear pink because it makes you look weird or whatever. They're just like every now and then while they're in the middle of a scene, there's a voice there being like, you should never wear pink or whatever. That's a weird example, but people things that people have said, things that they've experienced, kind of just keep coming back in
Mhm, mhm.
snippets in italics, like stuff like that. I feel like, again, it's just about like whatever this person keeps chewing over. And when I read a book that has a
Also their
strong,
assumptions about the world and how they fit in.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That's what I would not have before identified. But it's always where I can't start a book until I understand the character's relationship to the world. But I didn't put that phrase internal monologue on that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I was just ranting. I was just rambling.
No,
Yeah,
no,
I
you're not,
mean,
not at all. This is great.
yeah, anyway, I forgot what I was going to say, but it
I'm
just,
so sorry.
no, it's all
Yeah.
good. It's all good.
So talk to me about differences in first and third, both as how you use them. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about first and third and why you choose one over the other, and then how it changes internal monologue. That's a big ask. So just start. You have. Do you
Yeah,
want me to
so
break that down smaller, or can
no,
you just
no,
go?
I
Okay,
just
go for
no.
it.
So my next adult novel, the one that I promised to get it to Miriam, my editor, our editor, I guess. I promised to get
Yeah.
it to Miriam by tomorrow. So wish
Go.
me luck. I'm revising it right now. I'm actually pretty close. But like that novel, The Prodigal Mother, it started off in third person. Or no, it started off in first person. Sorry, it started out in first person. Like my first draft, which I wrote longhand in notebooks, was all first person. And then at a certain point, I decided to change it to third person, and a lot of that had to do with internal monologue, actually, because I felt like there were things which, if it was the characters saying them in their own voice, they seemed just a little too kind of ranty or a little too kind of like I don't know. I just didn't like how they landed in first person. And I felt like once I
Mhm.
moved them into third person, like I feel like ironically, in third person you can get away with a lot more ranting and a lot more kind of long like paragraphs of like just obsessing about stuff in third person than you can in first, because in first person it's like somebody like sitting across from you being like, I had to do something. This guy was driving me insane. I had to stop him. He was driving, blah, blah, blah. It's just this person kind of hectoring you. And as soon as it's in third person, and again, this is a George R. R. Martin thing, but also plenty of other authors, you can read like a paragraph of someone's rants in third person. And because it's kind of mediated through the kind of
Yeah,
filter of
yeah,
this narrator who is
yeah,
passing it along to you, and it lands very differently. So I feel like
yeah.
actually in some ways it's easier sometimes, like depending on the voice of the character, it really is all, it comes down to voice. As you kind of said earlier, it comes down to the voice of the character, but depending on the voice of the character, it can be easier to swallow like a lot of a huge chunk of someone's internal monologue in third person, because it doesn't feel like the person is just like chewing your ear off with their own thoughts. It's more like you are getting like, and when I wrote the YAs, especially the first YA book I wrote in first person, and that one I think actually switched from third person to first person, so it was kind of the opposite. And there, like Tina, the main character, has a strong internal monologue for sure. And she's just thinking all the time about what she wants, and she wants to seize this heroic destiny that she feels like is owed to her, is her due. And but with there, it's like the internal monologue is like small doses. It's very much like just like it colors her observations of everything that's happening around her, like everything that she describes around her, everything that's like she's hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting, every interaction with other people is just like tinged with her internal monologue and tinged with her like drive. And like for that, like especially for the YA thing, you need like, you know, short, snappy paragraphs, really intense emotion on the page. But it's much more like the emotion and much less the ranting, if that makes any sense, kind of. Like there's less ranting about it. There's more just like, I had a pit in my stomach. I needed to do something. Like, just kind of much more quick hits of like jolts of emotion. So I feel like, I mean, obviously every work is different, every character is different, every narrative voice, first or third, is different. But I feel like third person is really good at giving you like this just stream of consciousness kind of internal kind of like just chewing over something, just kind of like obsessing over it and tearing it apart and thinking about it in different ways. And like I think it's slightly harder to do that in first person, but if you can do it in first person, it can be really cool as well. I think it's different. Another thing, like recently somebody was talking to me about like show don't tell. This is something I wanted to make sure to mention because this just happened recently. And like the they were like, if a character is like telling us too much about like, or if we're hearing too much about like what a character is obsessing about, that's telling rather than showing. And I'm like, actually I really disagree. I think that like you are being shown this character's thought process, you are
Yeah,
being
yeah.
shown what they are. And plus I don't believe in show don't tell anyway. I don't agree with that rule. But I think that actually seeing like the thing of like, why did he say that? What did he mean by that? I don't understand. Like, this is the kind of thing that always gets under her skin, blah, blah, blah. That's actually showing rather than telling, because it's like, this is her kind of internal, this is her thought process, her kind of running commentary on what's happening in her life in real time. So those are some very disorganized thoughts about it. But I think in general, like I've, I love writing first person. I often have a hard time with first person because of that thing where it's somebody telling you their story or narrating to you what's happening to them. And it just feels very different when it's, someone kind of oversharing in that way. Like I feel like it should have, there's always some kind of distance involved in narration. And I feel like in first person narration, there should be maybe a little bit more of the consciousness that someone is like packaging their story for you, kind of.
That's
Whereas
exactly,
a
yeah.
narrator can be giving you privileged access to someone's thoughts, and it's like you're spying on them, kind of weirdly, almost.
I actually love that way of stating the difference because for me, and I've written a couple of, when I have to choose between first and third, I'll sometimes test write things both in first and third to see how it comes across. And most of the time, I'll end up in third because for me, there has to be a reason it's in first. Why is it in first? Why is this person telling this story in first person? They have to have a reason. If I know what their reason is, then I can continue with it. But
Oh,
then,
that's interesting. I
yeah,
like that.
and in well, in the two main cases I can think of, no, in the three cases I can think of, um, one was just a choice I made. My young adult fantasy trilogy. I made a choice to tell it in first person. And then once I had made that decision, then I just told it from that. And that was partly a first person is immediate, and also it will contain the story. It will help me contain the story, 200,000 word segments, which is very hard for me. But the other two cases, it was very much is, why are they telling it this way? Why do they have to tell it in first person? And a lot of times there isn't a reason for it, except I'm just trying to do the voice. But then the way they tell the story is part of the internal monologue. Like, as you said, what do they approach? What is their approach? Why are they telling you this instead of that? Why are they noticing this instead of that? And that happens in third also, but in first person, it's even more specific. Ken Lou read, was it it is actually, I sent him the opening of the third space opera, the third Sun books, the gender swapped Alexander the Great in Space. And I said, I don't know, do you think this is working? And he read it and he said, this is great. He said, but you need to have the first chapter where I reintroduce this group of characters, and I have to introduce all of them. And there's like 8 of them, right? So it's a lot of people. And he said, this all works fine, but you need to have the first chapter be from, it's most of the book is in third, but one character is in first person. He said, you need it in her point of view, because she brings an internal monologue to everything she says. So you're reintroduced to everyone through her view of them. And it's more entertaining, first of all.
Right, for sure.
And it's what she pinpoints about them is more likely to stick with the reader, and they go, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, I remember when she argued with him in the last book, or whatever, right? you know and
Yeah, and that's a key part of internal
yeah,
monologue is just like kind of coloring everything with like an emotion or with like an attitude. It's
yeah,
like, oh, that guy drives me nuts. That guy's annoying. Oh, that guy won't
yeah,
shut up about his fish. Like just like anyway, yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. And so that's what first person can do really well. But I also agree with you, because a lot of times I'll start writing something in first person and I'll go, this is entertaining, but there's no why here, why in first. And then I'll switch it to third, and it's like, I can get most of this stuff. I love your use of the term mediation, that we can get more of the ranting because it's mediated through the third person narrator, which is us. Yeah, that's great. I want to ask people, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A thing right now. Now, do it now. Oh, sorry. Talk to me about too little versus too much, because I think I've certainly read books in which basically there's not much internal monologue. It's mostly just action and reaction. I find it harder to attach to that, but some people seem to like that as well. But how much is, you talked a little about ranting being too much, but that's almost intensity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really depends on the book. It depends on, the type of book. It depends on like if it's like a, like genre. It depends on like everything. Like different genres have different expectations. And like the length of the book, how much we're going to have to really stick with these characters for a long time.
Mm,
Um, I think that, in general, the thing about internal monologue is that it, like everything else in the story, it kind of serves a purpose. And like, um, I think you have like I think if people are behaving in certain ways that you don't understand what they're doing, or you just don't care about what they're doing, like if you don't understand what motivates the characters, or if you don't understand what they care about, or if things just feel flat and kind of empty and pointless, then you don't have enough internal monologue probably. But too
mm,
much is just means that probably that it's getting too repetitive. It's getting too like, okay, we get it. She's really upset about fish. Okay, fine. Fine. Okay, we got it. I got it 10 pages ago. I think that part of it is just like how varied it is, how interesting it is. Like I love characters who kind of just like have stuff that they're thinking about, but every time they think about it, it's different or it's kind of through a different lens. Um, you know, how much is it changing us with the story? Like I feel like one thing I love about a lot of YA books I've read, and actually some adult books too, is that every time you get into someone's internal monologue, it's completely different because something has happened in the story. There's been some turning point, there's been some twist or
Yeah.
some development that has turned everything upside down, and this person is now obsessing about that. And it's like, yeah, the last time we were in this person's internal monologue, they were obsessing about this like person being stabbed at dinner, but that's old news. Now they're obsessed about this other person, getting thrown out a window. And like, it doesn't have to be that violent, but like something has happened in between the two doses of internal monologue that we're now chewing over the new thing, and it's kind of colored by all the stuff that we've obsessed about before, but there's a new thing we're obsessing about. And so I think that's part of it. Like, keeping it from just being the same internal monologue repeated over and over again versus like we're just processing the latest set of developments kind of. I think that's important. And also just like, I don't know, I mean, I like characters who intellectualize, like especially in my adult fiction, I like characters who intellectualize stuff. So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they're thinking about things in a very kind of nerdy theoretical way rather than just like I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. It's like more like, why do I hate him? What does it mean to hate somebody? How can we be better people to each other? Blah blah blah. What does Immanuel Kant say about this? Whatever.
It's, and that's an interesting point about layers of internal monologue too, because you can have someone who is only thinking about themselves. And I grant you that in some cases, teenagers are mostly only seeing the world through a lens, not, or maybe sometimes at some point in their teenage years, they will really be seeing things through the lens of how it filters through them. Um, and I think that's normal, but I also think teenagers are learning to start seeing the world through this bigger lens. And it's like, wait, but what about injustice in the world? And internal monologue gives you, just as you said, it gives you that chance to switch it up. So first they only see it here, and now they see this. And then I love your idea about how our obsessions switch, because that happens to me all the time. What kind of ice cream do I have for dinner? And do I have to mow the lawn? It's that's a reflection of how people really are, not these kind of flat, bland, stable pieces of land. We're all like, there's earthquakes and tornadoes constantly. And I feel like internal monologues can be those little blow ups of nice weather, tornado, nice weather, earthquake. I don't know. Because it reflects human thought. But also your point that the internal monologue, you can come back to talking about the more intellectualized things, and you can weave the two together, because we're all like that. I mean, it's how most people are, I think. um and isn't that our goal, to try to create characters who we can say, I understand this person, a little bit of this person as a human being, or whatever kind of being they might be.
Sure, yeah, and I think like I said, if their perspective is evolving, like characters who change over time are
Yeah.
usually more interesting than characters who stay static. Like, you know, even if there's one thing that the character can't let go of, like a thing that they want revenge on this person who wronged them long ago. Like the circumstances of their revenge, the logistics of their revenge, the like ins and outs of their revenge are going to change over time. And like, yeah, I think that's actually a good rule of thumb for internal monologues. I should be writing some of this stuff down, but I feel like a good rule of thumb for internal monologues is that it changes over time, that it's not just like static and, kind of um, just a straight line kind of.
I really agree with this so much. And one of the things that it can do is you can hold on to those, think of those like foundational pillars, which is this character. I always think about the Cold Magic books with the character of Andavai, who he's vain and he's a perfectionist, and that never changes. At the end of the story, he's vain and a perfectionist, but so much about him has changed that those things then are kind of his little anchors, right? You know, now he's thought about the world more. He's more secure in who he is. But so there's that balance between some essential parts of the person's psyche against what they're learning and how they're changing their view of things. That it's not that anybody has to do that in a story, but I love stories like that, where I can see that the person is still that person I first saw, but also that they have a new perspective on the world, however small it might be or big. And
Yeah,
internal,
100%.
great way to do that. Yeah. God. Okay. What else? I'm just I always keep coming back to why. I mean, we've talked about this idea of anchors and why first versus third. Do you ever, one of the things I wanted to mention is that how thankful I am to YA for breaking open point of view in adult science fiction fantasy, because it used to be that it had to be third person past tense, right? Old adult science,
I guess
or
so.
first person past tense. There was very little present tense in
Well,
adult
yeah,
science
that's true.
fiction
Yeah.
back in the day. And I feel like the rule, you could do first person past, you could do third person past, you could do multi-third, but now there's no rules anymore. It's like when I started writing the Sun books, I was like, well, this point of view has to be first person and it has to be present tense because it's in essence a memoir being
Hmm.
dictated. Um, and but no one else in the book is doing that. So the other ones are going to be third. And I thought, can I do that? Can I have third person and first person in the same
Why
book?
not? I mean,
Well,
why
why
not?
not? There's no,
Yeah.
because, yeah. And then you're switching though. You're switching the way you're doing internal monologue because you're switching from third to first. And sometimes first can seem more immediate, although not always.
Yeah, for 100%. Yeah.
Have you done multi with, so with your YAs, the first one is in third, it is in first.
Yeah, I mean the YA is the first one is in first person present, I think, and then
Yeah.
second one is mostly third person present with a little bit of first person, and then the third one, it gets complicated, but there's some first person and third person mixed together. Also, my previous adult novel, The City in the Middle of the Night, is half first person present tense and half third person past tense, I think. Can't remember. I think that's right. And like it's just, and it just works because, well, I think it works because those two POV characters are coming from such different viewpoints and tones and styles and attitudes that having one be first present and the other third past just kind of made sense. It just kind of works.
When you were
Uh,
writing that, and you knew when you were writing that's how you were writing it, right? What did
Actually,
you change your
yeah.
mind while you were working on the first draft of book 3?
Of oh, the YA. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a complicated
Or
situation. That's
either of
kind of
them, or
spoilery.
City in the Middle of the
So,
Night. Oh, okay.
City in the Middle of the Night originally only had one POV. It was Sophie was the only POV. It was all first person. It was all just Sophie's story. And I got to the end of writing that, and I had a really good draft. And then I was like, it feels like there's something missing here. It feels like it's not quite. It needs something to kind of give it a little bit more energy at certain points and a little bit just a different perspective on some of the stuff that's going on. And so I basically just created a whole new character out of whole cloth, Mouth, the other POV, and inserted them into the
Oh.
story. And Mouth, I was like, well, Mouth's perspective is going to be very different, so I'm going to try writing that, third person, and I guess it'll be past tense. And that was actually kind of the novel was basically done, and I decided to add another character to the mix, and I was really glad I did because I felt like as I was revising it after that, the Mouth stuff and the Sophie stuff really started to inform each other in a way that felt much richer than if it had just been Sophie.
But you weren't, with that specific example, you weren't writing you weren't switching between first and third at the same time. You wrote the second one separately later.
That's right. And then I ended up doing a lot to kind of weave them together and make them kind of more seamless. But yeah.
What observations did you have in terms of internal monologue and how you approach that because there's a contrast? Because once you do it, there is a contrast between it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about. Like, Sophie's internal monologue is all about her friend Bianca, who she has been separated from at the start of the book. And so, like, building up her relationship with Bianca, building up her love for Bianca, and like their separation and everything that Sophie goes through. And that was written in a way that was pretty YA, actually. It's very like, I have this really strong emotion about this person. I'm like, I would do anything for her. And then, all these terrible things happen. And it's just like, how am I going to go on? That felt very YA in a way, actually. It was very much informed by reading a lot of YA at the time. And then Mouth's internal monologue kind of comes back to what we were saying before about like about Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett,
Hmm.
etc.
Hmm.
Like Mouth's sections were kind of almost deliberately written in a very hard-boiled kind of pulp um, style.
Oh,
And so Mouth's internal
oh,
monologue was much more just, and also Mouth is someone who is deeply repressed and has repressed all of her feelings about everything. And so Mouth's internal monologue was just a lot of kind of just a mixture of just like trying to survive and trying to deal with stuff and like just kind of observing the world through this very slanted kind of um,
yeah,
you know, cynical lens, but then also there's just things that keep bubbling up to the surface and kind of trying that are things that Mouth is kind of repressing. And like, I tried to make Mouth's internal monologue like there's a thing early on where Mouth kind of says that they are a hardened killer who doesn't care about killing and killing comes easy to them. But then we notice that every time Mouth kills somebody, it's incredibly hard for them and they struggle with it a lot. And just stuff like that, where I was trying to make Mouth's kind of the narration tells you what Mouth thinks about themselves, but then also immediately tells you that it's not true, kind of.
right.
Um, that kind of stuff, which I think in some ways is easier to pull off in third person because there is that other narrator who can kind of feed you information a little bit that's kind of outside of what this person is consciously acknowledging. And so it was very different. Like Mouth's narration right from the start was distanced, and we were kind of seeing Mouth from the outside a little bit more, but also getting Mouth's obsessions and Mouth's concerns, but with this understanding that Mouth was full of shit. And then meanwhile, Sophie, we're just right there in her POV. Nothing, she's not full of shit. Everything she thinks is completely right because we're in her POV. And like, she feels things so intensely. And in fact, she's also full of shit because she's fixated on Bianca, who turns out not to really deserve that from her.
That
But
level.
we're not gonna get that from her. We're not gonna get that from the narration. Um,
There's such an immediacy to first person, and there can be to third, but I wonder if immediacy in third is linked to how tight it is. Like the more limited third we get, the more immediacy we can get. But when you move out to
mhm.
omniscient, it's not that that can't be incredibly engaging, because it can. When it's well done, it's phenomenal. But I don't think you get that immediacy of the first person voice or the immediacy of the Mickey Spillane, right?
Yeah,
Voice
I mean,
where
yeah, I mean, omniscient third is really good for irony. It's really good for humor. It's really good for just sort of showing you the bigger picture. Douglas Adams is like my go-to example of someone who does omniscient third really well, where
yeah,
he'll show you what Arthur Dent was thinking, but then he'll also show you what all the people around Arthur Dent are thinking in the same moment, and it's just like, oh, everybody's completely wrong about what's going on, and they're all wrong in different ways, and we're going to show you all of it. It's great for that, but I think tight third is better for like, yeah, the immediacy. And I kind of found recently that like part of why I like first person present tense is because first person past tense doesn't have as much immediacy for me. First person past tense is somebody sitting by the fire with a pipe being like, ah, so I had some great difficulties in the past. There was a man with a gun and I thought he might harm me, but clearly he did not because I'm here by the fire with my pipe.
yeah,
Oh, yes,
yeah,
herf. I've seen some terrible things in the past. It's just like whatever. Whereas first person present tense is you're right there in the moment and stuff is happening and this person is reacting. And their reaction is not kind of colored by any kind of reflection or anything.
yeah, yeah. I've written in both first person past and first person present, and they are different. The Cool Magic books are in past tense, but there's a very specific reason that you literally don't find out until the last page of the book.
Oh,
Why
wow.
it's in first person of the trilogy, not the book, the trilogy, why you don't find out why it's
Wow.
in first person and why it's in past tense. And it's, for me personally, it was worth the wait. I don't know if it is for readers, but it had to be that way. But also that the voice of that narrator is very, I don't think the voice of that narrator would have been better if it was present tense, because she's very funny, but it has to be told that way. But that's another thing to try to figure out, though, both with internal monologue and with choices between first and third and past and present tense, is what's going to tell your story the best, what's going to give you the effect you want on the readers. Whereas the character in the Sun books, who's doing first person, it has to be present tense, because there's a reason that that character is narrating it in order to get, as, and you mentioned this before, they're narrating it in first person present tense to get a response. They have an agenda. And
Oh, I love that. That's
yeah,
interesting. I love that.
so their agenda is part of the choice of why I chose that. That means, and I've never, have you written anything in Omniscient, Third Omniscient? I never have.
I have, yeah. I mean, a lot of my stuff is omniscient third. All the Birds of the Sky kind of gets omniscient at times. My novelette, 6 Months, 3 Days, is completely omniscient. Like we're jumping back and forth between the two main characters' heads, and it's just like within a scene, we'll go back and forth between their perspectives. I really love omniscient third, and I want to do more of it at some point soon. There's a huge backlash against omniscient third right now, so if you do that, you risk having people just kind of, not want to read your book just because it's in this thing that they think is dirty or terrible or whatever. But I
Yeah,
really love it,
or old fashioned.
right?
Because that's very, it's very 19th century, that person, because there is a narrator. That's what, the narrator is just way up there. I want to do Omniscient someday, because I think there's a lot you can do with this contrasting, because you can move around. You do that
Mm-hmm.
in limited third too, but it's because the limitation, the narrowing, it changes. That's what's so interesting about point of view, though, is because each choice you make kind of put something in what you're, it changes how you can do it, the decisions you make. You can't just arbitrarily, to me anyway, I mean, you can, anybody can do whatever they want. But to me, every decision you make about point of view and tense changes the nature of how you can approach the story, and how you can approach the internal monologue. So do you have anything? So I'm gonna, some people will have gone over already to, there's a writing, well, you've done that,
Oh
haven't you?
yeah.
A writing thing, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure who, can someone type in who it is? And then I can say that. Does anyone,
Oh,
Cecilia
Cecilia Tan.
Tan?
Oh my God, I love
Oh,
her. She's
yeah.
amazing.
Does anybody have a question? Because otherwise, I'm going to ask Charlie Jane to say something wise to close up with. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh my gosh, I have no wisdom.
Yes, you do. You
No,
have great
always
wisdom. You've
check your,
made me
okay.
think totally differently about internal
Okay,
monologue.
something wise. Always check your calendar in the morning, even if you think you know what you're doing today, because like otherwise you'll totally forget about the Zoom thing that you promised to do.
We've
It's just,
all
oh my
been there.
God.
We've all been there. We've all been there, but it worked out, right?
Yeah, no, this
Right?
was lovely, and I so enjoyed chatting with you, and this was so great, and like, I'm so glad we got to hang out. Like, it's been way too long, and this was so fun, and I should definitely do it again, and I'll show up on time next time, I promise.
All right. Yeah, well, you have to think about another great topic, because you came up with this and I would never have come up with this. And
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm so glad you
Well,
did.
I will think about it. I will give it some thoughts.
So we're gonna close up by saying that next month, oh my God, I should have written this down. Excuse me. Next month on February 18th, Susan Dennard is going to be back, and we're going to
Oh my
talk about
God.
when, I know last year we did one on burnout, and I think we're going to do one about on a related burnout topic of like knowing when to take care of yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually last year Sue's got me to admit stuff that I never say. She's very good at pulling these things out of you. I'm very private and I'm like, so I said stuff I would normally never say in public. So that's on February 18th next year. For those of you listening on YouTube, when this gets put up, thank you for listening. Charlie Jane, thank you for this.
Thank you
This
so much for having me. This was so awesome.
fantastic. I now
This was
have
so
to
awesome.
read, I have to read some noir now or reread some noir now because it's
Yeah,
been
I'm
so
sorry I
long.
was rude about like
You
I
weren't
pushed back
rude.
on
No,
your
you were correct though.
okay.
You were correct.
I
So
feel
it's
like I
not
was
rude
just
at
shouting,
all.
kill them all, but you know.
No, no. This is why I do this. I don't need people to be here telling me, oh, I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't care if people would agree with me. I agree with me most of the time, except when I don't. I'm here to hear people's perspective, which is different from mine. That's how I learn. That's how we learn, right? That's how we
That
learn.
is how we learn. That is 100%. And actually, I learned a lot from this conversation. This was great. And
There.
like,
Um,
yeah, I'm gonna think about that thing of like how you decide what the reason is for it to be first and third. Because I've never thought about it like that before, but I like that a lot. Like,
well, see, we each approach. That's what I love about doing Narrative Worlds is that everyone approaches this craft in a different way. And I don't know, I find it amazing.
me
Um,
too. Me too.
yeah, yeah.
It's awesome.
So we will close this now. Thank you, Charlie Jane. Thank
Thank you
you,
for having me.
CJ, for the other CJ. Oh my God. For being the host and doing the stuff. Thank you for everyone who was here today. And thank you as always to SFWA for hosting this.